Hi everyone, and thank you so much for tuning into this short video. My name is Hajo Reiners and I'm Professor of Education here in Auckland, New Zealand. Well, you can't see it, but Auckland's right here. And I'm also TESOL Professor and Director of the Doctoral Program at Anaheim University in the United States. And the purpose of this short video is to give you a little bit of background and a bit of a summary of the article that Phil Benson and I recently published in Language Teaching. And the title of the article is Language Learning Beyond the Classroom, a Research Agenda. And the first thing I'd like to do in this video is briefly explain why we feel this is such an important area. And the first obvious point to make, but it's one that it's very easy to forget, is that the majority of language learning, of course, takes place outside the classroom. The majority of language learners do not necessarily go through a formal course, a formal structured pathway to acquire whatever language they want to acquire, for the reasons they want to acquire them and up to the level that they want to acquire them. A lot of people learn languages for fun, to go on holiday, to watch TV, understand song lyrics, play computer games and what have you. And it's interesting to note, for example, that sites that support this kind of learning, like Duolingo, are very, very popular. In fact, Duolingo, the last figures I could find for it was 110 million active users, and that was back in 2015. So it'll be even more now, and I don't think there's any school or university in the world that can claim to have 110 million people learning languages. So these are massive and really important communities for us to investigate and to understand. The second reason why the majority of language learning takes place outside the classroom is, of course, because as learners, even if we are taking a course, most of the thinking, the processing, the practicing, the using of the language takes place outside the classroom. Most of the forming of our identity as a user of a new language is shaped through our experiences outside the classroom, which is why study abroad programs, for example, are so important, and why language learners tell us that encounters with native speakers, whether online or face-to-face, can have such a major impact on their learning. So these are two important reasons to look to see what actually happens outside the classroom. Now, there has been, of course, as you know, a lot of interest in various types of learning beyond the classroom, including the role of autonomous learning, the roles of self-instruction, naturalistic learning. And part of the problem is this very wide range of terms and concepts, all of which mean something slightly different, and often something slightly different to different people. And in some ways this has held back the field a little bit. The other reason, of course, is that it's a lot easier to investigate a classroom. Let's be honest about it. You've got a group of learners who you know are going to be in a particular place at a particular time, and they will do whatever it is that you want them to do as a teacher, researcher, and it's easy to investigate them. Outside the classroom is a different story. Learners are everywhere, all the time. You're dealing with fuzzy concepts like learners' beliefs and attitudes and feelings and identity and social situations and what have you. Very tricky to investigate, but also, we argue in this article, a very important and very exciting area. The first thing we do in the article is try and clarify a little bit of this terminological confusion, and we're basing this part of the article on Phil Benson's work in 2011. Phil Benson, of course, being the co-author of this paper, which I forgot to mention at the beginning. I should have. And in his 2011 work, which we summarize and expand on in our article, we identify 4 dimensions, if you will, of learning beyond the classroom, which is the kind of catch-all phrase that we've selected for the article. The first of these is location, which is simply about where does the learning take place. And this is where we see words like self-access learning, learning beyond the classroom, after-class learning, extracurricular learning, those types of terms. The second is formality, or the degree to which learning is linked to educational qualifications or structured in some way by educational institutions. And this is where we use terminology like formal versus informal, non-formal, naturalistic learning, and so on. The third is to do with the pedagogy, the degree to which teaching is involved. And we use concepts here like non-instructed learning, self-instructed learning, and so on. And the final one, the fourth one, is the locus of control, which refers to the ways in which decisions are distributed between the learner and other people. And this is where we use terms like autonomous learning, independent learning, self-regulated learning, and so on. What is really important with these terms is, of course, there's a little bit of overlap, they blend into each other, but even more important than that is the fact that they usually come together in very interesting constellations. So it is entirely possible for a classroom learner, somebody who's taking a formal course, for example in a language school, to also engage in learning beyond the classroom. Similarly, an autonomous learner can make an informed decision to take a structured course. And finally, a self-instructed learner can choose to use materials that are designed for use in a classroom. So in that sense, the teacher, if you will, is in the materials, even though the learner is a self-instructed learner. So it's a complex interaction between these different dimensions, and it's really important that we are clear about what we're talking about when we investigate any or all of these. What we do in the second part of the article, without giving away too much of the secrets in the article, we want you to read it, of course, but essentially we propose a range of topics, a range of research projects that we think would be both very worthwhile but also practical for most researchers out there. And we divide them up into three broad categories. The first is trying to understand what types of learning take place outside the classroom and where do these types of learning take place. What kinds of environments are there for learners? What kinds of affordances or potential benefits do these environments have for learners? What kinds of drawbacks do these environments have? And this is the type of research that looks at environments such as digital games, the use of fan fiction, self-access learning, language cafes, home tutoring, study abroad. There's a whole range of different settings that involve learning beyond the classroom, a lot of which we have very little information about. So that's the first kind of setting, the first set of questions. The second is to ask how. So not so much where, but how do learners actually go about shaping their language learning experiences? How do they plan, if at all? How do they motivate themselves? How does the process of identity formation take place? And this is where we advocate for the use of longitudinal studies, the use of language learning histories, the use of critical incident analysis, looking to see what are some of the really important events that shape the language learning experience of our learners. The final category is around how do we support learning beyond the classroom. And this is a really important point because as educators ourselves, we do not advocate for the closing down of all language classrooms around the world, not at all. But in fact, what we see is the language classroom and the environment beyond the classroom as two environments that can support each other. So we see learning beyond the classroom as an extension of the classroom, not necessarily as a replacement for it. But the question is, of course, how do teachers and the resources that they use and that they provide, the materials they develop, curricula that they have, how do we prepare our learners for the other types of learning, the independent, self-directed, autonomous learning, and so on, that we've talked about beyond the classroom, and how after our students leave our courses, how do we continue to support them? And at the moment, again, there is precious little research to investigate these types of links, and we propose a number of suggested projects that students and researchers can take up and hopefully bring back to the community so we can learn from them. It's our hope that some of you will read one or more of these ideas and say, yes, this is really fascinating, because it really is both a very challenging and a very important field. And if you do decide to take on one of these projects, by all means contact one of us. You can reach me through my website, innovationandteaching.org. There's a contact button. Love to hear from you, see how it went, and any other ideas that you have that are not in the article, please let us know. We're always keen to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching this short video, and we look forward to hearing from you.